I didn't introduce myself like people expected. Not at first. I let the weeks do it for me. When I started coaching the youth team at Hawthorne Park, I did it the way I'd always done hard things, quietly, on time, and without asking for credit. I wasn't the loud type. I didn't show up with a clipboard full of slogans or hand out flyers with my name printed big enough to be seen from across the street. I brought a worn duffel bag that smelled faintly of old detergent and leather conditioner, a few spare belts for cleats, and the kind of patience you don't learn from books. The boys called me Coach Walters, even though I hadn't asked them to. Some coaches wanted titles to feel powerful. I wanted the kids to feel safe. On my first day, I watched them run drills on a sun-baked field that had more patchwork than real grass. The late summer air was thick with the smell of cut heat and old Gatorade. Their helmets clacked when they got careless. Their shoulder pads thumped like a quiet drum line. They moved like kids, eager, inconsistent, too full of energy that hadn't yet learned where to go. I stood at the edge and told them one thing, simple as a rule written in the dust. Eyes forward, feet under you. If you miss, miss clean. They tried to listen like I was any other coach, but I'd already noticed how adults watched me. People looked at my hands first. They were work hands, fingers that had held steering wheels, rifle grips long ago, wrench handles, and the strap of a duffel like it had become part of my spine. They looked at my shoulders next, still solid but not young. And then they looked at my face, the way you look for a reason to either trust someone or avoid them. There was always a moment when I could feel the calculations starting. Most of the time, I let them have it. I wasn't in a hurry to win them over. I didn't believe in winning like that. I just kept showing up. The league organizer was a man named Trevon Hayes, and he carried the kind of confidence that didn't come from patience. Trevon talked like every sentence needed an audience, like the field was his stage. He wore his whistle like it was a badge, and he had a habit of addressing kids like they were already disappointing him. Trevon wasn't mean exactly. He just believed that energy came from control. If he didn't control the room, he thought the room would break. I'd seen that kind of thinking before. One Tuesday after practice, I stayed to help the boys pick up cones. A couple of them were still sticky with sweat, their faces flushed and bright, the kind of brightness you only have before the world starts teaching you that people lie to protect their own comfort. Trevon approached me while I tied down a tarp that covered extra practice equipment. "You're late again," he said like he was reading a report. I checked my phone out of habit, though he had already decided what he would say next. "Practice starts at 6:30, I replied. "It starts at 6, Trevon corrected. "It starts at 6:30 for us," I said, and my voice stayed calm like I was adjusting a schedule for someone else's convenience. "The kids get dropped off later." Trevon's eyes narrowed. "The league schedule is on the wall. You can read." I did read it. I'd read it the first day. I'd just also watched the parents pull into the lot at a certain time every week, watched the kids arrive with backpacks still bouncing from the car ride, and watched how quickly the energy faded once they were rushed. I wasn't arguing about a schedule. I was trying to protect rhythm. Trevon stepped closer, lowering his voice as if the field were full of people he needed to impress. "You can volunteer all you want," he said, "but if you're going to coach, you do it right. You understand?" I understood. I'd understood things my whole adult life. I understood the difference between authority and influence. I understood that some men only felt safe when they made other people feel small. That day, I nodded once. Not agreement, not apology, just acknowledgement that we were on two different tracks. Then I went back to tying the tarp. As the weeks passed, I kept to my lane. I'd call formations and let the boys practice until their bodies remembered. I'd stop them from tackling too hard, stop them from getting reckless, stop them from turning anger into momentum. Sometimes the kids would come up after practice and talk to me like I was the only adult who didn't move like a threat. They asked me about my time in the service, because kids always ask questions when they see something they don't recognize. But I never fed them a story to make me interesting. I never turned my past into entertainment. I'd just look at them and answer what mattered for that moment. "What I learned is this," I'd say. You don't show up late to people who depend on you. They'd repeat it back like it was a chant. Coach says don't show up late. And I'd smile without letting it become a performance. Trayvon noticed the shift. He noticed when the boys started listening to me faster than they listened to him. He noticed when parents looked at me and didn't look away. At first, he tried to absorb it, like maybe he could claim it. Then he tried to dismantle it. It happened one Saturday in early October when the sky looked washed out and the clouds hung low like they were tired too. We had a game scheduled against Westbrook. The stands weren't full, but the parents were there. They were the kind of parents who watched like the field was a mirror that reflected their own decisions. I was setting out team water when Trayvon walked by with two other league volunteers. "Coach Walters," he said loudly, as if he wanted the words to land before he even explained them. "We need to talk." I didn't react. I just finished pouring water into the last cooler. He waited, letting his impatience show. Then he pointed toward the sideline where a banner hung, "League Rules" printed in bold letters. "That," he said, "is your assignment. You don't get to just do whatever you want." I glanced at the banner. Practice plans were listed there, the time frames, the drill guidelines. My eyes lingered on the last line. "Community coaching only," I read softly. I wasn't sure what he was trying to prove. I'd followed the guidelines. I'd asked no one to ignore them. I'd just been mindful. Trayvon continued as if he was building a case for someone else. "Somebody told me you've been, how do I put it, changing the drills without permission." I had made small adjustments, switching up the order, extending breaks, adding extra rep work for the kids who got stuck. Nothing unsafe, nothing outside the spirit of the program. But Trayvon didn't care about the spirit, he cared about permission. "Which drill?" I asked. Trayvon opened his mouth and closed it again. He didn't have an answer. He had anger without evidence. "It doesn't matter," he snapped. "It's just not how we do things." A few parents had turned their heads. I could feel their curiosity pressing in. I kept my face neutral. I'd been in rooms where people watched you to see what you'd do next. I'd learned not to give them the satisfaction. Trayvon lowered his voice, and the softness made it worse. "You're not a credentialed coach," he said. "We could use someone else who's qualified," I finished. He blinked as if my calm had insulted him more than his own words. "It's for the kids," he said, like that excused everything. I looked at the boys lined up near the fence waiting for the whistle. Their helmets were still clean. Their faces were still open. I remembered suddenly how young I'd been in uniform, how people had treated me with different levels of respect depending on what they thought I was, how quickly a label could become a cage. I didn't want that for these kids, so I finally asked one question. "What happened to you?" Trayvon stared at me. His mouth twitched like he wanted to laugh and couldn't figure out why he should. "What?" he said. "Your voice," I said, and I made sure it wasn't accusing. "When you talk to them, your voice sounds like you're afraid they'll disappoint you. Who told you that?" Trayvon didn't answer. He didn't have an answer that wouldn't crack. The whistle blew for the game. Trayvon turned away, but his anger followed like smoke. I could see him out of the corner of my eye. I could see him talking to other adults and gesturing toward me. Later, when we lost the first quarter, Trayvon acted like the loss was proof that my influence was harmful. The boys were tired. The other team was bigger, stronger. The field had uneven spots that made it harder to cut. But the boys weren't crushed. At halftime, I brought them together near the bench. "Listen," I said, "they're bigger, fine. Bigger doesn't mean smarter. We use angles, we use timing, and we keep our heads." They nodded, not because they were convinced by my words, but because they recognized my tone. The second half, the ball moved differently. Not because the boys suddenly became adults, because we stopped rushing and started breathing. We didn't win the game, but we made plays. We forced turnovers. We stopped a wide run that would have gone for a score if the kids had stayed frantic. On the walk back to the parking lot, a few parents thanked me quietly. "Good coaching," one woman said. Trayvon overheard and didn't respond. He walked straight past, his whistle bouncing against his chest. That should have been the end of it. But trouble doesn't always show up like drama. Sometimes it shows up like a small problem that someone hopes will stay small. It happened 2 weeks later. We had a weekday practice after school. The air smelled like diesel from the road and wet leaves from the trees. Kids came in clusters, laughing too loudly because the day had been long. I was near the lockers, checking that the pads were strapped down. A few boys were tossing towels into bins. Trayvon's voice cut through the noise. "Coach Walters," he called, and the way he said it made it sound like a warning. I turned. He didn't look at me like a man discussing a team. He looked at me like a man trying to win an argument. "You're done," he said. No one else had spoken yet, but heads turned. The kids slowed. Trayvon pointed toward the parking lot as if he were directing me out of a building. "You need to leave," he said. "Right now." The words hit the air, heavy and unfair. Not violent, not explosive, just cold. One of the boys, young, still soft in the cheeks, stared at Trayvon and then at me. "Coach," the boy said, "why?" I didn't answer the boy. I looked at Trayvon. "On what basis?" I asked. Trayvon lifted his chin. "League policy, community volunteers, you've overstepped." Overstepped. It was a neat phrase. It sounded clean. It sounded like the kind of thing adults say when they don't want to confess what they really did. My mind went back to the way Trayvon had watched me all season, watched me get more attention from parents, watched me correct kids without humiliating them. My past wasn't a secret in the way people think secrets are, the way people carried scars, the way they held themselves, the way their eyes didn't flinch at certain sounds. It all gave you away. But I didn't want to pull a curtain back. I didn't want to turn my life into proof. "I'll talk to the league coordinator," I said. Trayvon's lips curled slightly. "You don't get to." Then he raised his voice. "This is a youth program," he said, like he was placing the kids between us so he didn't have to answer. "We're not having whatever you're doing." A few parents stepped forward. A couple of them looked embarrassed, like they'd accidentally attended a private humiliation. I saw the boy's hands clench near his sides. He wanted an answer that made the world make sense. I gave him the only answer I could without making it worse. "Go line up," I told him, gentle. "We still practice." The boy hesitated. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't threaten. I just used the tone I used when I needed children to listen and obey because the alternative was chaos. The boy moved. And that's when the parking lot went wrong. At first it was a sound, a sharp crack, metal striking metal, followed by a vehicle door slamming too hard. Then a shout. A man's voice, panicked and angry at the same time, yelled something I couldn't fully make out from the field. At the same moment, one of the mothers near the fence stepped back, her face draining. She looked toward the lot. "What?" she started. Trayvon's head snapped up. He looked startled, but in the way some people are startled by danger only when it touches them. The commotion grew quickly. I saw a teenager, maybe a brother of someone on the team, rush toward a car near the curb. He was holding his phone out like he was recording. Then a man in dark clothing, tall, moving fast, came around the corner of the building. He didn't belong. He didn't wear league colors. He wasn't part of the staff. He had the kind of body language that didn't belong in a youth lot. Shoulders too squared, stride too certain, hands positioned as if he expected something to be taken. Another man stepped in his way, one of the dads, a solid guy named Reggie who coached a younger team. Reggie's voice rose, demanding to know what was going on. The dark-clothed man shoved him aside. I heard Reggie's grunt, more surprised than hurt, and I saw his hand go to his arm like he'd taken a blow. Then I saw the teenager with the phone back up, wide-eyed. He wasn't brave. He was recording. The dark-clothed man moved toward the mother's car. I don't know what he was looking for exactly. My body recognized the pattern before my mind caught up. It was the same pattern I'd seen in places where trouble tried to look like normal life. I stepped forward without speaking. Trayvon reached out as if to stop me, his hand landing on my sleeve. "Don't!" he hissed. "This isn't your—" I didn't jerk away. I just guided his hand off my arm and kept my eyes on the parking lot. "You're not going to stop it from yelling," I said quietly. Trayvon frowned. What are you doing? I didn't answer. A few parents were frozen. Some kids began to cry because they could smell fear and couldn't name it. I walked toward the lot with a steady pace, the kind that makes panic look foolish. Inside my head, I kept a list. Distances, exits, bodies. My hands stayed low, not because I wanted to show control, but because I wanted everyone else to see that control was possible. When I reached the edge of the lot, the dark-clothed man had his hand on the car door. He glanced toward me. His eyes flicked over my age, my posture, the fact that I wasn't wearing an official uniform. His face said what people often think when they see a veteran who doesn't fit their category. He thought I was harmless. He tried to get the door open again. I spoke once, not loud. Stop! He froze for half a second, annoyed like I'd interrupted something private. Back off, he snapped. My voice didn't rise. Hands where I can see them. He took a step toward me, and in that moment, I saw the small metal glint in his waistband. I didn't reach for anything. I didn't explain anything. I just shifted my body so I was between him and the people behind me, making a corridor of safety without making myself the center of attention. The mother nearby gasped. The teenager with the phone said, "Bro, what are you—" The dark-clothed man's patience ran out. He moved his right hand toward his waistband. That's when Officer Denise Park arrived. I hadn't even heard her car, which meant she'd been close enough that the lot wasn't as quiet as I thought. Maybe she'd already been driving through when the shout happened. Maybe she'd been off duty and decided to stop. Whatever the reason, her arrival felt like timing that didn't belong to chance. Her voice cut through the air with authority so controlled it didn't need volume. "Sir, hands, now!" The dark-clothed man hesitated, because the uniform changed the rules. He might have wanted to believe he could talk his way out. He might have wanted to believe someone else would handle it. But Officer Denise Park wasn't asking questions. In a calm cadence, she moved her position to box him in without turning it into a show. I kept my hands visible. I didn't point. I didn't yell. I didn't perform for the camera that wasn't there. Trayvon finally found his voice again, shouting, "That's him! That's the guy!" as if he'd discovered a villain in a story. I looked at Trayvon briefly, then back to the situation. The dark-clothed man's shoulders slumped when he saw that the trap was real. Officer Park moved in with measured steps. Her eyes stayed locked on his hands. The teenager backed away, phone held up but useless now. Parents moved behind the nearest barrier like they were remembering suddenly what safety meant. Within a minute, the dark-clothed man was restrained. No one got heroic. No one got hurt in a way that took away time from their future. The scene stopped being chaotic and became a set of facts. Someone had tried to commit a theft or something worse. Someone had stopped it early enough, and everyone else had lived through it. After the man was secured in the police car, Officer Denise Park turned her attention toward me. She didn't rush over like I was a celebrity. She walked with purpose, and then stopped at a respectful distance. "Sir," she said, "did you see what happened?" I didn't brag. I answered like I always had, with clarity and restraint. "I saw him reach for the car," I said. "I told him to stop. I kept people back." Officer Park nodded slowly. "And you didn't," she said carefully, "do anything that would escalate it." I didn't take credit. "I didn't want him to react to fear," I replied. Officer Park's gaze tightened a fraction, as if she'd heard something she recognized. Then she glanced at my hands, at the way I stood, at the lack of trembling. "My dad was in the service," she said suddenly, like it came out without planning. "He taught me that calm is part of the job." "It helps everyone," I said. Officer Park didn't smile big. She didn't do the warm, theatrical gratitude people sometimes perform. Instead, she made a decision. She turned slightly and called over her shoulder to another officer. "Check his name," she said. "Verify any prior service record if there's a unit match with Walters." I felt my stomach drop the way it always did when the past started coming forward like it had been waiting for the right moment. But I didn't protest. I'd already learned that some truths don't ask permission. When the other officer came back, Officer Denise Park spoke in a measured tone. "Marcus Walters," she confirmed. U.S. Army veteran. multiple deployments. She didn't list details like she was reading a highlight reel. She just said it like it was information that mattered. A couple of parents nearby stared at me in a new way. Trayvon, standing at the edge, looked like he'd been caught changing the subject mid-truth. His face twisted between embarrassment and denial. "What does that have to do with—" he began. Officer Park cut him off without raising her voice. "Sir," she said to Trayvon, "this man helped stop an attempt before it escalated. I'm going to need you to stop interfering." Trayvon swallowed. He tried again, quieter. He wasn't cleared," Trayvon said. "He doesn't have credentials." Officer Park's eyes shifted to him. "Credentials," she repeated. "You mean the kind you can print, or the kind you earn?" Trayvon didn't answer. I felt the boys behind us watching. Their faces were still uncertain, the world still new enough to punish them for trusting. One of the younger kids looked at me and then looked away quickly, as if being corrected by reality was embarrassing. I felt something like warmth, but restrained. The kind of warmth you keep inside when you've learned that too much emotion can become a weakness someone else uses. Officer Park looked back at me. "Do you want to press charges?" she asked. I shook my head, not because I didn't care, because I'd seen how revenge drags people into a second fight. "I want him stopped," I said. "The rest is between the court and him." Officer Park studied me, then she nodded once. "Thank you, Marcus," she said. That name, my name, sounded normal in her mouth, not like a headline, but it changed everything anyway. After the officers left and the police tape was pulled away, the parking lot slowly returned to ordinary noise. Kids spoke in broken voices. A mother hugged her child hard enough to make him squeak. Someone ran to retrieve a backpack they'd dropped when they panicked. Trayvon stood near the sidelines, staring at the ground. He didn't approach me. He couldn't. His insults had nowhere to go now. That's what restraint does. It doesn't leave room for a fight. Later, after we got clearance to resume practice, I walked back onto the field. I didn't do it dramatically. I didn't call the boys over and make it a lesson. I just started stretching them out the same way I'd planned to before the threat showed up. The boys watched me like they were waiting for me to change. But I didn't change. I just kept coaching. The first drill after everything happened felt different. The sounds were the same, pads, sneakers, breath, but the air was heavier. Like the world had been reminded of its own dangers and decided to hang on that memory. One boy approached me after practice. His name was Calvin, and he couldn't have been older than 12. "Coach," he said, "are you like special?" The word special carried the weight of misunderstanding. I crouched so I was level with him. "I'm just the guy who showed up," I said. Calvin frowned. "But you stopped it. You told him what to do." I shook my head slightly. "I didn't stop it," I corrected gently. "I helped stop it. The officer came. Everyone did their part." Calvin stared at the grass as if he were deciding whether to believe that. Then he nodded. "Okay," he said, and he went to wash his hands. The next day, the league coordinator called a meeting. It wasn't announced loudly. It wasn't framed as punishment. It was just a meeting in a community room with folding chairs and coffee that tasted like it had been sitting too long. Parents filled the room in clusters. Some looked embarrassed. Some looked relieved they didn't have to admit anything. Officer Denise Park wasn't there in uniform. She was there as a person, sitting in the back, keeping her hands still in her lap. Trayvon sat near the front, jaw tight. When the coordinator finally spoke my name, it didn't sound like news. It sounded like someone had run out of patience for fiction. "Marcus Walters has been with us," the coordinator said, "as a volunteer coach. During yesterday's incident, he assisted in stopping a suspect attempt on a parked vehicle at the Hawthorne Park lot." No one clapped. No one gasped. There was no theater, just a collective recalibration. The coordinator continued. "The league will review our volunteer requirements, but the immediate decision is this. Marcus Walters will remain an approved coach for the season." Trayvon's face turned pale. He stood up as if he needed air. "That's not fair," he said. The words came out too fast, like he'd already rehearsed a defense. The coordinator held his gaze without flinching. "Fair," she repeated. Isn't what we measure by your feelings, Trayvon. Trayvon's shoulders slumped a fraction. He looked toward Officer Park for support. Officer Park didn't give it. Instead, she asked a quiet question that made the room go still. Do you remember when he asked you what happened to you? She said. Trayvon froze. People shifted in their chairs. Officer Park continued, still calm, still factual. You don't need to love a volunteer, she said. You need to stop creating danger with your ego. Trayvon opened his mouth. Nothing came out. That was the most honest silence I'd seen all year. I didn't stand to make a statement. I didn't take pleasure in watching Trayvon fail. I didn't want him destroyed. I wanted the kids protected. So I stayed seated. The coordinator ended the meeting by telling everyone to return to their normal tasks: practice, youth development, training. But the room had changed. Even the coffee seemed different. After the meeting, Officer Denise Park approached me in the hallway. She kept her distance at first, like she'd learned to respect the space veterans sometimes need. Can I ask you something? She said. I nodded. Why didn't you escalate? She asked. You had every reason to. People were watching. A lot of men... She stopped, corrected herself. A lot of civilians would have panicked or made it a show. I thought about the word reasons. It was always the wrong word. There were reasons, sure, but what mattered was what I had learned. I looked at her badge. I looked at the careful way she stood. I didn't want to give him anything he could use, I said. She frowned. Use for what? I didn't get sentimental. I didn't turn it into a lecture. Use fear as permission, I replied. Officer Park's eyes softened just a little. Do you miss it? She asked, meaning the uniform, meaning the structure, meaning the purpose. I could have answered with an easy line. I could have made her feel like she'd asked the right question. Instead, I gave the truth that fit the room. I miss knowing what matters, I said. Officer Park nodded. Then she glanced toward the door where kids would soon file out for the next practice. Your unit, she said carefully. What were you? The question wasn't meant to pry. It was meant to place my restraint into the context of training. I didn't dramatize the answer. I was the Reaper, I said quietly. The words landed without fireworks, but they changed the air. Officer Park didn't react like a fan. She reacted like a professional who recognized a legacy and respected its silence. She inhaled slowly. Okay, she said. That explains a lot. I didn't ask her to explain anything back. I just thanked her and walked toward the field. That week, Trayvon stopped showing up. Or maybe he showed up once and stayed in the shadows like he didn't want his presence to become a problem again. Either way, the team felt calmer. The parents spoke to me with a different tone. They didn't gush. They didn't ask for stories. They just watched their kids learn without the constant tension of someone trying to control the air. One night after practice, I stayed longer again. The boys' parents were collecting helmets, the stands emptying. The field lights hummed with an old electrical sound. Calvin lingered and then hesitated. Coach, he said, my dad said you were in the war. I didn't react like he'd said something shocking. Kids always carried rumors like they were toys. I was, I said. Calvin's eyes widened. He looked nervous now, like he didn't know if he should ask the wrong question. So I helped him with a direction that didn't hurt. What do you think you're supposed to do with that? I asked him. Calvin blinked. With what? With my war, I said. He thought for a moment. Then he said, be good? I smiled once, small, genuine. That's the closest answer you'll get, I said. Be good, not perfect. Good enough that people feel safer around you. Calvin nodded slowly. Then he ran off to help his dad. After that, the season moved toward colder weather and busier schedules. Games came and went. The boys learned how to lose without falling apart and how to win without acting like the world owed them something. Some kids improved quickly. Some needed time. I coached the same regardless. Every practice, I gave them rules that sounded simple. Don't quit when your legs burn. Don't blame when you make a mistake. Don't be reckless when you're angry. Don't treat people like they're stupid just because you're faster. Behind those rules, I was teaching something else. Restraint. It wasn't restraint because I feared consequences. It was restraint because I believed violence wasn't the only power. Dignity was power too. Recognition was power. Truth was power. And in a youth field, those forms of power mattered more than any trick play. In mid-November, the league hosted a small ceremony at the field before a weekend game. The mayor was supposed to speak, but he didn't show. Someone brought up flags late. The sound system kept popping. Still, people tried. The coordinator approached and asked all approved coaches to stand in a line. I did, not because I liked attention, but because I understood how community rituals work. You don't refuse them. You let them serve the people they were built for. A few other coaches stood with their arms folded, looking annoyed at the time. Officer Denise Park arrived, wearing a plain jacket now, not uniform. She stood near the front and watched. Then the coordinator said a few words about community service. It was general, carefully worded, but the moment shifted when the coordinator looked down at a small set of documents. During yesterday's incident, she said, we were made aware of Marcus Walters' service. She didn't use dramatic language. She didn't say medals like they were trophies. She didn't tell a war story. She simply spoke my name and then looked at the parents and kids like she was giving them the right kind of information. Marcus assisted law enforcement with calm and clear action, she said. He stopped an attempt before it escalated. That kind of responsibility belongs in every community. The boys around me stood a little taller, not out of fear, out of pride they didn't know how to hold yet. No one clapped loudly, but people nodded. A few of them looked at Trayvon's empty seat in the bleachers and then looked back down at their programs like the program mattered more than the drama. Officer Park stepped forward after the coordinator finished. She didn't ask me to come up front. She just spoke directly to me in a voice the mic could barely carry. Marcus, she said, thank you again. I nodded. Then, without speeches, she held out a small, folded paper. It looked like a form. No explanation, she said. Just the league's recognition of your official approval. I took it. The paper felt light in my hand. It wasn't a medal. It wasn't a headline. It was simply proof that someone had corrected a wrong, and for once, that was enough. Later, after the game, I walked to the equipment shed to return a few pads. The boys gathered around me again, but this time their questions were different. They didn't ask about war. They asked about practice. How do we stop missing assignments? One boy asked. Coach, another said, why does it matter who lines up where? I answered them like I always had. Because it keeps everyone safe, I said. Not because I needed them to believe me, because I needed them to understand that safety wasn't luck. It was planning. It was discipline. It was respect. When the season ended, there was a banquet. The tables were plastic and the food tasted like it came from a place that catered to large groups. People laughed and took pictures. I sat with the boys and their parents. I tried to keep my posture relaxed, but I kept an awareness of the room anyway. Not paranoia, just the habit of scanning what needed attention. Trayvon wasn't there, but his absence wasn't dramatic either. It was just a missing person-shaped gap. A young man approached me near the dessert table. He wore a team hoodie and looked like he was trying to decide whether to be brave. Mr. Walters, he said, my little brother says you're the Reaper. The way he said it wasn't mocking. It was respectful but unsure, like he'd picked up a story from the wrong source and didn't know where to put it. I studied him. I remembered what it felt like to be young and labeled before anyone actually listened. So I answered with restraint. I'm Marcus, I said. The young man nodded like he understood. Then he added, my brother said you didn't even brag. You just kept coaching. I felt my throat tighten slightly, not with sentimentality, but with the quiet truth of being seen accurately for the first time. I don't coach to be remembered, I said. He blinked. Then why? I looked at the kids laughing nearby. I looked at the dessert tray. I looked at the community room's fluorescent lights. Because a team is a place where people learn how to act when it matters, I replied. The young man smiled and walked away. I stayed seated for a while longer. In the end, that was the real redemption. Not a spotlight, not revenge, Not even full understanding from everyone, just dignity. A quiet veteran had been underestimated by a man who needed control. And when the moment came, when someone tried to turn a youth field into a target, he didn't dramatize. He didn't posture. He simply did what he'd been trained to do. Protect lives, preserve calm, and let the truth be the loudest thing in the room. When the ceremony ended and people began to pack up, I returned home with the same duffel bag I'd brought on day one. The same worn zipper. The same faint smell of old detergent. I didn't look in the mirror to look different. I didn't search for applause. I just laid my bag by the door, checked the lock, and thought about tomorrow's practice. Because that was the point. A record speaks, and so does the way a man chooses not to turn fear into violence. The world had finally recognized what it should have understood from the start. But I didn't need the recognition to know who I was.